Hi, happy Tuesday. There's always a glare in here, so let's fix that. So apparently Tuesdays at 3 o'clock are a really busy time at my house because Jimmy is demanding to be fed and then immediately let out. And I had a client who was going shopping and was sending me pictures of, is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? And I was essentially going shopping a couple of states away. So just helping to guide them to make some better decisions because, reading labels is very confusing, and that advertisement that is on the front doesn't tell you really anything. It's just their advertising page. And so I kept telling this client, I said, turn it around, show me the back of it, show me the back of it. And they were like, oh, okay, I get it. Now I need to start reading the back of it. So I love that. Kind of fun, something, a different way. I love that, in functional medicine that I have, sorry, I'm just responding real quick to another message. I just love that in functional medicine, we kind of, not only do we meet you where you are, but we get really creative to bring you forward because, we're doing a lot of things like changing your diet, changing your sleep and wake patterns. Sometimes we're changing, how you spend your, how you move your body, some, different things as far as like lifestyle. We're changing your nutrition. We might be changing sort of what you do, as you prepare to eat. Like that's a lot of things. So I just love that I have the, freedom to get creative and to meet people where they are and like I said, to help bring them forward, teaching them new things, figuring out how to help them incorporate what I'm teaching them into their life. Or how to do those tiny little pivots, those tiny little tweaks along the way so that we get the results that they want without this huge change that it's hard to incorporate. It's hard to take that first step. And secondly, it's hard to make it stick. Because when you go from here to here, that's a big change. And that can be painful sometimes. And it feels like, it feels a little bit like punishment if you're having to give up something or if you're having to, instead of this, eat this, or instead of that, do this. So I always like to make this as pain-free as possible, but still little by little course correct until you're actually pointing in the right direction. You're getting the results that you want and you're doing the things that are actually going to help you. All right. Sorry. I'm still shopping. Okay. So what I wanted to talk to you about is something that, hey, Kathy, and Kathy is one of those, I'm just going to brag on you for a minute, Kathy. Kathy is one of those people that, okay. So I was just telling him to get ground flax seeds instead of whole flax seeds because it's easier for you to get the nutrition out of it, just in case you were wondering. But I'm going to brag on Kathy for a minute because we've been, she's been tuning in to my Facebook group and getting in on the challenges that I'm offering. And she has done exactly what I am talking about. All right, one last question and then we're done. So he's asking me about what kind of nuts and I'm asking him to get any kind, plain instead of roasted if possible. And the reason being is because some of the healthy fats that you have in nuts can not be as healthy once you roast the nut. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. The questions just keep coming. So he's looking for nuts, and I told him to get, plain instead of roasted if possible. And then he has this cranberry nut and seed mix, and I said, no, don't do that. And the reason being is because that cranberry is not going to be it's probably going to be dehydrated, which is not a problem, but sometimes it will have added sugar to that. Okay, so here's what I wanted to tell you about Kathy is that she's joined my Facebook group. She has hopped in on some free challenges that we're doing. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to start one on Friday, which is Whole Foods. It's a Whole Foods challenge, and we're doing some prep work until Friday, and then it's just 7 days. But in 7 days, we can do a lot. We can have you feeling a whole lot better brain fog, less crashes, more energy, less cravings, maybe even less belly bloat, maybe better digestion as far as regularity, going to the bathroom, that sort of thing. Whole Foods, it doesn't take a whole lot of time in order for you to start feeling those results, but that's another thing that she's going to hop in on. But what I wanted to say is that, she was someone who had to have her sugar and had to have her creamer in her coffee. And she was like, I don't want to give up coffee, but I don't think I can drink it any other way. And just little by little, tiny little changes that we made to that coffee so that she could still enjoy it. So she didn't feel like I was taking away her coffee, but we actually made it a whole lot more healthy for her. We had her to drink some other things. We had her to eat before she had her coffee. And we switched, her sugar for allulose because it doesn't spike your blood sugar. And then we switched her, her processed creamer for whole milk. And then she actually drinks black coffee now by choice. That isn't something that I told her to do, but she just, realized that as she started making these changes that the way that you feel and how you feel better is its own reward. So that's just amazing. But that's the benefit of functional medicine. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, I think my friend is good for a little while. One thing that I wanted to talk about, and I have some notes here just so that I can stay on track because we know how I can get off track, is there's a calculation that when I am helping someone with their metabolism. I'm helping someone with their energy. I'm helping someone get their blood sugars under control, whether they're pre-diabetic or diabetic, or whether they just feel like something's off. Maybe they're having some things that they relate to hormone problems like brain fog, irritability, can't concentrate, poor sleeping, all of those kinds of things. And I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, that's literally everything. And sometimes it is, but that's how your blood sugar literally affects everything. So if your blood sugar is off the charts, out of control, you may develop something called insulin resistance. And one of the calculations that I love doing on people who get my core health panel, because I get one of the lab values that is required in order for me to tell you if you are insulin resistant. So that HOMA-IR essentially is a calculation that we do on your labs that tells us whether you are insulin resistant or not. And how you measure this is that you look at your fasting blood sugar and you look at your fasting insulin. Again, that's probably something that most of you have not had done, but your fasting insulin, and you multiply those two numbers together, and then you divide by 405, and that's going to give you a number. So if it's 1.9 or less, that is an optimal level. That shows that you are not insulin resistant. If you are 2 or above, then that shows that you have some degree of insulin resistance. And of course, the higher the number, the more progressed or the more pronounced your insulin resistance is. And so one thing that I just wanted to take a moment and talk about is that when we are talking about blood sugar balance, we're talking about pre-diabetes, we're talking about cravings, that kind of stuff. We always have to think about what's happening with insulin. What is insulin doing? Because even when we taste something that has flavor but doesn't have any calories, our body already releases insulin, kind of preparing for those calories, for that glucose that it thinks is going to hit our blood sugar. So we have to think about our blood sugar. We have to think about insulin. Sorry, we have to think about insulin whenever we think about blood sugar, because that's our response to what we're eating. That's our response to where our blood sugar is. And when the way that we get insulin resistant, the easiest way that we get insulin resistant is 2 things. We either spike our blood sugars really high, meaning that we have these processed foods, or we're eating sort of the standard American diet, the SAD diet, which has a lot of refined carbohydrates. Refined carbohydrates just mean that we took them in their natural form and we changed them so that we took out the fiber, we took out maybe the fat, we took out a lot of the things that actually blunted that sugar response that we get from these. And so now it's literally like pouring sugar in our bloodstream. And so we get this really high, it just goes straight up. That's how our blood sugar goes up. Well, guess what happens? Our pancreas goes, oh my gosh, our blood sugar is going to go through the roof. I have to respond with insulin. So it sends out this big squeeze of insulin. And those things aren't always matched up exactly. So what usually happens, because our pancreas is trying to save us, because we don't want that blood sugar to spike really high, because it's a neurotoxin. It's a toxin to our brain. And so we want to get it back down to this narrow range. And it usually overshoots that. So we release a big amount of, like a big load of insulin to take care of this big load of sugar that we have in our bloodstream. And so we usually overshoot that. And then what happens is our blood sugar goes below normal. And so now we have this craving. And this is an innate, this is something that God gave us to keep us from dying from low blood sugar. But we've actually created the problem because we ate that high sugar load to begin with. And so our innate drive is that when our blood sugar goes low, now our brain isn't firing. It doesn't have the energy. It doesn't have the ATP to fire. So what our bodies do is it creates this craving. And what do we crave? We crave fast sugar. So we're going to crave maybe the same thing that we just ate to start off this roller coaster. And that ends up giving you this roller coaster up and down all day long, because you're overshooting and then you're plummeting, and then you're overshooting and then you're plummeting, and you're craving carbs. So that's one way that you do it, is that you start off in the morning with something that is I call it naked carbs, because that would be a carbohydrate that quickly turns into glucose in the bloodstream. It gets absorbed really quickly from the gut, and it doesn't have any fat, protein, or fiber with it, because fat, protein, and fiber actually slow down how quickly our blood sugar goes up, and it also blunts how high our blood sugar goes. So that's why you'll hear me talk a whole lot about me wanting you to not eat any naked carbs, that I always want you to have your carbohydrates with fat, protein, and fiber. Okay, so the second way that we get this insulin resistance is that we are constantly snacking. And, just with the way that things are set up nowadays, we don't have to go out and hunt our food. A lot of times we don't have to prepare our food. Like, we have all these convenient ways that we can get our blood sugar up, right? We have chips, we have cookies, we have candy, we have whatever. We have drinks, sodas, that Starbucks triple chai latte, frappuccino, macchiato, whatever it is. You can tell that I don't order those things because I have no idea what I would be ordering. But I just know that, sometimes those drinks have like 1,200 calories in them, 800 calories in them. And most of those calories come from carbs, especially when we say almond milk or fat-free, milk or, those kinds of things, because that little bit of fat that was in the milk that we were going to put in there, we took it all out and we added some refined carbohydrate. And so that just ups the blood sugar even more. So high spikes that start that roller coaster is one way. The second way is that we're constantly spiking our blood sugar all throughout the day. So insulin is always showing up in the bloodstream, and it's always showing up at the receptor of the cell, and that's the cell membrane. And so what happens is, it's kind of like anything. It's kind of like the more we see something, the less we're moved by that. Okay, so if you're somewhere, let's say you live in Utah and you just see these beautiful sunsets, or you see this beautiful mountain range, and maybe I live somewhere at the beach. And so when I go to Utah and I see that beautiful mountain range, it's very striking to me. But for you, it's probably not all that striking. Same thing with me. If I'm at the beach every day and I get to see the ocean every single day, I probably don't have the same response that you would coming from Utah, and you don't get to see the beach that often. So it's kind of like we sort of get immune to this insulin. And so the other thing that I want you to think about is that insulin immediately stops any fat burning that we have going on. And you can get into fat burning a couple of different ways, but usually it's because you've gone a period of time without stuffing your face, without snacking on something, usually about 4 or 5 hours. And so the insulin is out of your bloodstream, the blood sugar is out of your bloodstream. And now what you've done is you've tapped into those cellular stores of fat, and you're burning fat now. The other thing that can happen is that when you have your overnight fast, so normally in the morning you are fat burning. And if you're someone who pays very close attention to what you're eating, and you're eating whole foods, you've cut down on these processed foods, and you are balancing your blood sugar, meaning that you're including that fat, protein and fiber anytime that you eat carbohydrates, and maybe you've cut back on the number of carbohydrates that you eat altogether, then you have actually allowed your cells to get exposed to fat, and your cells know how to burn fat. It's just that we never get exposed to it because we never go any period of time without eating something, right? We snack all the time, or we eat these really just concentrated, refined carbohydrates. So what I want to tell you, like the insight that this HOMA-IR gives us beyond what we see in the fasting blood sugar, which is something that most people have had on, if you've had any labs done, then fasting blood sugar is almost certainly something that you've had measured. Functional medicine, optimal levels, we want it below 90. So we want it kind of 60 to 90 or 65 to 90. Traditional values will say 100 is normal, but that 90 to 100 is actually showing dysfunction. It might not be showing diabetes, but it's certainly showing dysfunction. And so that's where, functional medicine and those optimal levels, that's where we pick up like little tiny clues along the way that maybe your cells are not functioning as well as they could be. And so that's why it's important to know what your levels are and to know what that optimal level is, rather than just what's printed on your lab report, because we can pick up on that dysfunction. The other thing that we see is that we see a hemoglobin A1C, and that's really kind of your average blood sugar over the last 90 days. So that fasting glucose is just one shot in time. Now it does mean that you're fasting, so you have to have been at least 8 hours without anything to eat. But for some people, they will have been 12 hours without eating. For some people, they will have been 16 hours without eating. For some people, they'll be just 8 hours without eating. And that actually makes a difference in what your fasting blood sugar could be, all in the same person. So this is just like a little picture. It's a little snapshot of what your blood sugar is doing. But that hemoglobin A1C is really kind of like a movie of what your blood sugar has done with all that snacking, all the times that we ate, just those prepared foods, or that highly processed foods, or when we didn't have a balanced plate, where we didn't have fats, proteins, and fiber on our plate that we ate with our carbohydrates. So it really shows, like that roller coaster that I was telling you, it takes an average of all of that really high number, that really low number, and it can show us when there's some dysfunction. And the value that I want you to kind of pay attention to is 5.2. Anything over 5.2 up to 5.9 is that window of dysfunction, where we can't say that you're diabetic, we can't say that you're pre-diabetic, but we can certainly say that something is going on, that your receptors aren't working as well as they should, that your blood sugar is probably higher on many occasions throughout the day than what we actually want it. So that's what we get from that fasting glucose and what we get from that hemoglobin A1C. But here's what that HOMA-IR can give us, and why I always want to see a fasting insulin. Because you could be in that window of dysfunction, but we don't know what's causing it. Like, was it a fluke thing? Were you sick and that's the reason that your blood sugar was high in that little snapshot? Or did you what happened over those 30 days? Like, what was happening in those 30 days? Maybe you were constantly snacking, or maybe you were really spiking that blood sugar and causing that roller coaster right from the beginning of the morning, your first meal of the day. So what this insulin tells us, or what it could tell us, is that your hemoglobin A1C might be normal. Your fasting blood sugar might be normal. But that fasting insulin, what it tells us is how hard your pancreas is having to work to keep those values normal. And that's where a fasting insulin is worth its weight in gold, because we might not see dysfunction yet. We might not see disease yet. But what we see is that your pancreas is working really hard, and maybe next month we're going to see some dysfunction. Maybe we're just right before, we took a snapshot right before you actually have that dysfunction. And that's what that fasting insulin tells us. It tells us how hard behind the scenes that your pancreas is having to work to keep that blood sugar normal. And if it's having to pump out a whole lot of insulin, that gives us a clue that maybe your insulin receptors are kind of starting to ignore insulin, because it's either getting a big load of insulin or it's getting multiple spikes throughout the day. And so your insulin receptors are starting to get insulin resistant. So we can see that in a fasting insulin. But when we put all of this information together, when we look at your fasting glucose and we look at your fasting insulin, and we do this calculation where we multiply those numbers and we divide by 405, many times we will see that you are headed on the path for dysfunction, for insulin resistance earlier than anything else. And that's when we really want to intervene. That's when we want to make those changes. That's when we want to, change the way that your plate looks so that you're not eating those naked carbs anymore, that you are adding fat and protein and fiber to your meals, even to your snacks, or that we convince you that, maybe we spread out how often you're eating, so that you can go 3 or 4 hours in between your meals and you cut out that snacking window. If your blood sugar is unbalanced and you're really on that roller coaster, many times until you balance that first meal of the day, you can't go more than about 60 to 90 minutes in between snacks because your blood sugar's low and you are craving and you have to do something about that blood sugar. So it really is this whole process. But what I love about how functional medicine does is that it really gives you, it's kind of like this kind of crystal ball, and it tells us what's going on behind the standard numbers, right? It tells us what's going on and maybe what we're headed for. It might actually be a GPS for us a little bit. It's a little bit of a crystal ball, a little bit of a GPS. It says if you don't change anything, you're headed for dysfunction, you're headed for insulin resistance. And what's beyond that is pre-diabetes, and what's beyond that is diabetes. So I love this as one of the labs that I would love for everybody to do, because right now everything's kind of stacked against us. We have these ready-made meals. There's a snack around every corner. Everybody has candy and little things on their desk that they can just reach over and grab. Many times because of convenience sake, we don't really have to. It doesn't take long to prepare anything, that we just sort of have everything at our fingertips. And that is why we are in this metabolic kind of mess that we're in. And that's why we see so much insulin resistance. And that's why we see so much prediabetes and diabetes. So I hope that this helps someone today. If it made sense to you, then please share the information with someone. Share this recording with someone so that they can get the information as well. Or teach someone, teach your family, teach your friends, teach your little circle of influence that you have. And hopefully, hopefully I've explained it well enough that you understand it well enough to teach it to someone else. That's how you really know that you know, right? Is if you can teach it to someone else. But sharing this so that they can get it firsthand is a first step in that. I'm always, I always want to arm us with the best information out there so that we can fight back to how manipulated our food sources are, and how, there's been so much misinformation for so many years that we don't know who to trust, where to find the right information, what to believe, what's true, what's not true. And so that's why I am out here 3 times a week giving free information, because I really want to arm you with the best information out there so that you can make better choices for yourself. Okay, so I will see you all tomorrow. I'm actually going to go a little early. I normally go at 10 o'clock, but I'm on a podcast at 10 o'clock. So I'm probably going to go at 9:30, where we will talk about Wealth Wednesday. And since I believe that your health is your wealth, we're probably going to be talking about health again. All right. I'll see you tomorrow.